The year is 1991, and Ren and Stimpy proved that cats and dogs can get along. It was the year that Clarice met Hannibal Lecter, Pogs became a worldwide obsession, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers were desperately trying to give it away. But we're not here to talk about how you gotta get it and put it in you, reeling from the feeling, don't stop, continue, because today we're counting down Electronic Gaming Monthly's top 10 reviewed games of 1991. Happy, joy. Between the launch of the Super NES and continued support for the Genesis, Game Boy, TurboGrafx-16, and NeoGeo, 1991 was a year full of landmark games. In fact, there were so many great games that we start our list with a four-way tie. To break this tie, I decided to turn to the greatest 200 games of their time feature, published in Electronic Gaming Monthly's 200th issue. This not only helped to sort out the 9th and 10th place, but it also brings us our two honorable mentions. Up first, we have Mega Man and Dr. Wily's Revenge on the Game Boy. The four critics were impressed with what Capcom was able to do with the limited hardware. Ed sums it up perfectly. The graphics are exceptional, and virtually nothing has been sacrificed by going to the small screen. With a flurry of 8s and 9s, the Blue Bomber averages an 8.5 out of 10 for this black and white adventure. The other honorable mention is Aero Blaster on the TurboGrafx-16. Ed, Martin, and Steve all pretty much said the same thing. Easily one of the best shooters for the Turbo yet. The best side-scrolling shooter for the Turbo yet. And you can't ask for much more in a shooter. But Steve just wasn't having it. He gave the game a 7, complaining that it doesn't come close to Blazing Lasers. Aero Blaster shoots down an 8.5 average. Now let's see who actually made the list. For those that only know the NeoGeo for their fighting games, there was a time when SNK's 24-bit system was the home for a wide variety of arcade titles. The system launched with shooters like Cyberlip and Nam 1975, sports games like Baseball Stars Professional and Top Players Golf, and even a first-person brawler named the Super Spy. But the one game that truly stood out didn't star ninjas, athletes, space marines, or soldiers, because the NeoGeo's first killer app was Magician Lord. Definitely a winner, gushes Steve. Magician Lord has the perfect blend of advanced graphics and strong play, evenly spread out across a fantastic series of worlds. Martin echoed those thoughts. Definitely the best NeoGeo game there ever will be. Well, now let's not jump ahead and say that this is going to be the best NeoGeo game of all time. I mean, Samurai Showdown is pretty awesome. When it comes right down to it, the biggest complaint anybody had was that it was too expensive. Ed raved that it has the graphics and sound like an arcade game, and it is an arcade game. If you have a deep wallet, why not get an arcade game? I guess I can see the logic in that, but you really did need to have deep pockets at the time. It's probably worth mentioning that Magician Lord was released in 1990, which makes this an odd fit for a list about the best games of 1991. For reasons I have yet to figure out, Electronic Gaming Monthly waited almost a full year before reviewing any of the NeoGeo launch games. And even when they finally started talking about SNK's system, they only covered Magician Lord and Ninja Combat. Thankfully, it left an impact, because EGM named it the 179th best game of all time a quarter century later. That's a lot better than Ninja Combat. When you wanted to show off the Super Nintendo's mind-blowing capabilities, you really only had two choices: Pilot Wings and FZero. One of those games let you fly high above the world, while the other turned out to be one of the best 16-bit racing games of all time. If this list only had room for one of them, I'm glad EGM went with FZero. While it lacked a multiplayer mode and could stand to use a few more vehicles, this Nintendo racer was an absolute stunner that scored well with pretty much everybody. As you can see, Martin tried his hardest to hold in the excitement. This game is awesome. I've never enjoyed a driving game as much as I've enjoyed this kart. Ed agreed, noting that he prefers true racing games. This futuristic version has some pretty cool features that won him over. They both gave it a 9 out of 10. This is slightly more generous than Steve and Sushi X. who both gave it an 8 and had some reservations. Overall, FZero averaged an 8.5 out of 10. Now, observant viewers will remember that this was part of a 4-way tie, which included Magician Lord, Mega Man and Dr. Wily's Revenge, and Aero blasters. So how did I break this tie? Simple. I once again went to the greatest 200 games of their time that was published in Electronic Gaming Monthly's 200th issue. FZero came in at number 69, wedged between Mortal Kombat 2 and NFL football on the Intellivision. That's good company. You might consider that mashing together two completely disparate genres isn't all that novel, but it was practically unheard of in the early 1990s. When you bought an action game, you knew you were getting an action game through and through. But that wasn't the case for ActRaiser, a genre-bending adventure from Enix that debuted shortly after the Super Nintendo's launch. Critics were confused and delighted by the game's mix of action and SimCity-style god game. The result was magical, and it remains one of my favorite 16-bit games of all time. In order to properly talk about ActRaiser, we first have to accept that Electronic Gaming Monthly reviewed it 3 different times with 3 completely different scores. Let me explain. EGM first reviewed ActRaiser in their 25th issue in a section called the Super NES Video Game Buyer's Guide. Instead of getting a quote from each critic, this supplement published a brief overview of the game and listed out the scores without details. As you can see, both Steve and Martin gave it a 9, while Ed and SushiX went slightly lower with an 8. 1 month later, the same 4 critics reviewed the game once again, this time using their typical format. They loved it, giving it all 9s and calling it one of the Super Nintendo's best games. Truly awesome, raved SushiX. This is the Quest RPG game which all others will be compared to, no matter what system the game is on. Ed agreed, concluding that finding a game better than this is going to be hard to do. Now, here's where things get even weirder. A few months go by and Electronic Gaming Monthly published their 1992 Video Game Buyer's Guide, which is where they end up listing most of the reviews found in that year's issues. They published the original text, but gave ActRaiser completely different scores. Now we have Steve and Ed giving the game an 8, Martin with a 7, and SushiX the only one keeping a 9. Sure, this is probably a typo, and they should have kept the original 9 scores, but it's still weird. When we average all 12 scores together, we see ActRaiser with a very confusing 8.6 out of 10. In a year full of great 2D shoot-em-ups, Gaiares stands above them all. And you don't need to take my word for it, because this guy wants you to know that this game really smokes. With his goofy smile and iconic mullet, professional gamer Jamie Bunker quickly became the face of Gaiares. He was there to tell you that Revolution's space shooter was number 1. And whenever the critics gave the game high scores, he was there to remind you that these guys think Gaiares is awesome. If you want to know how rad Gaiares is, then Jamie's your guy. All joking aside, Gaiares is a pretty special shoot-em-up, and Electronic Gaming Monthly agreed. Games just don't get any better than this, exclaims Ed. The graphics, gameplay, challenge, sound, everything is about the best ever on a Genesis cart. SushiX was even more impressed, telling Thunder Force 3 to move on. Once I started playing the game, I couldn't put it down. Steve wasn't nearly as taken by Gaiares as his colleagues, wondering if the 8 megs of memory used could be considered overkill. To his credit, he still liked the game. Gaiares is one of those few titles that puts a new face on an old genre, but succeeds in the process. Overall, Gaiares averaged an 8.75 out of 10. Between a Battletoads prequel, a Kid Icarus sequel, and a Mega Man game where Dr. Wily finally got his revenge, 1991 was a pretty great year for the Game Boy. It was made even better by the existence of Operation C, which was not only the 3rd proper Contra game, but also the best reviewed handheld game of the year. Take that, Castlevania 2: Belmont's Revenge. Steve started off with a heavy dose of hyperbole. I was very surprised when I played this game. Operation C on the Game Boy? Impossible. Wrong. This version of the arcade smash is even better than the NES counterpart. SushiX agreed wholeheartedly. The previous NES Contras were good, but this game kicks. He even called it the best Game Boy game ever. The truth is, Sushi X wasn't wrong. EGM had reviewed a total of 45 Game Boy games between 1989 and 1991, and Operation C was the first to score an average of 9. In fact, EGM would go another 2 years before seeing another Game Boy game earn the same score. Simply put, Operation C was one of the best reviewed Game Boy games of all time. That's impressive, but I'm still not sure it's better than the NES counterparts. One thing I love about these lists is that there's always an oddball game that makes the cut. I mean, we expect to see big titles like ActRaiser and FZero on the board, but who would have guessed that Kabuki Quantum Fighter would have made it all the way up to number 5? But before we think that EGM is crazy, you should hear out their reasoning. There's a case to be made that this game should be remembered as an 8-bit classic. Quantum Fighter is incredible, raved Steve. He loved everything about it, from the acrobatic flips and techniques, to the cinema scenes that are comparable to Ninja Gaiden. Martin said that Kabuki Quantum Fighter is actually more intense than Ninja Gaiden, which is high praise indeed. Ed wasn't as interested in making the comparison, as he couldn't believe how they pulled off these types of graphics on the NES. All four men gave Kabuki Quantum Fighter a 9 out of 10, recommending that gamers play it immediately. Gamers didn't listen, and these days that 8-bit classic is all but forgotten. As far as I'm concerned, 1991 can be summed up as a year with two feuds. On one side, we had Mario versus Sonic, while in the other corner, it was Final Fight versus Streets of Rage. These were the battles that defined a year where everybody wanted to know what was better, Genesis or Super NES. When it came to the feud between Final Fight and Streets of Rage, Sega's action-packed masterpiece won with a decisive blow. It was everything Capcom's brawler should have been. Streets of Rage offered two-person multiplayer, more levels, several characters to choose from, and faster combat. Electronic Gaming Monthly took notice and gave it all 9s, whereas Final Fight could only scrape together a few 7s. Final Fight, move over, shout Sushi X. This is the type of fighting game I've been waiting for since Fighting Street. It called it easily the best fighting game ever, with moves that are unique. Steve said that it's the real version of Double Dragon for the Genesis. And if that wasn't enough, EGM's Hottest Video Game Babe Award went to Streets of Rage. What an honor. Even with the launch of the Super NES and all the big hitters on the Genesis, 1991 was still a great year for the Nintendo Entertainment System. While Quantum Fighter was pretty damn cool, it was Battletoads that ultimately stole the show. This was the game that proved that Nintendo's 8-bitters still had some life left in it, and made even the most cynical brawler fans sit up and take notice. Battletoads was a stellar game, and it was rewarded by some of the best review scores of the year. And not just from Electronic Gaming Monthly, but from everybody. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Martin loved Battletoads. Amazing graphics and animation will blow you away. Best of all, the game is extremely fun to play, a quality that's hard to find on any system. Fake Ninja Sushi X gave his thesaurus a workout when he said, excellent, radical, most triumphant. If Battletoads doesn't make you laugh at its hysterical animation, or fry your brain cells with utter amazement, you are reading the wrong mag. And if that doesn't do anything for you, both Ed and Martin agreed that Battletoads nearly got a perfect 10 out of 10. That seems to be a reoccurring theme. While it might have missed that perfect score by this much, Battletoads did manage to walk away with the NES Game of the Year award in the 1992 Video Game Buyer's Guide. It was also named the most challenging video game of the year, which makes a ton of sense. Between the awards and all this talk about nearly getting a 10, Battletoads deserves its spot at number 3. And here we are. This is the showdown we've all been waiting for. With the Super NES launching with Super Mario World and Sega debuting Sonic the Hedgehog, it was only a matter of time before these two platformers got into the year's biggest fight. At first glance, it would appear as though Electronic Gaming Monthly liked them equally. But upon closer investigation, it's obvious why Super Mario World is sitting at number 2. The editors of Electronic Gaming Monthly loved the Super NES launch game, but it felt like a lot of the air had been sucked out of their reviews. Well, Super Mario World may not be the ideal cart to show off all the fancy things that the Super NES can do, explained Steve. It's a solid continuation of the Mario series. That's not what I call an enthusiastic review. The same can be said about Ed. Easily the best Mario adventure yet, but I had hoped that Nintendo would do more with the game than just make another Mario adventure. These guys seem almost depressed. Good thing Sushi X is here, because he's just about the only one that sounds genuinely excited about Super Mario World. The ultimate Mario adventure. Now that's more like it. But even though the game blew him away, Sushi was still ready to give Sega the win. Only one game in the genre rated higher in my book. But since 10s are impossible, Sonic will have to share the same rating. 10s are impossible? Is this the same Sushi X that gave both Ninja Spirit and Super Monaco GP perfect scores in 1990? The hell are you even talking about? You want to know the reason why critics at Electronic Gaming Monthly seemed underwhelmed by Super Mario World? The answer is obvious, and his name is Sonic the Hedgehog. Just look at the timing. EGM reviewed Sega's Speedy mascot just 1 month before Mario. Sonic stole Nintendo's thunder to such a degree that it was hard for them to go back to another Mario adventure. They still recognized the great gameplay and level designs, but things just weren't the same after Sonic. The EGM editors were stunned. Super Sonic! Super Sonic! Sonic is super alright, yelled Sushi X. The Genesis shouldn't be able to put Nintendo's 16-bit banger to shame so early in the contest. The critics sensed that this was going to be a big deal for Sega. This game is absolutely unbelievable. If you don't get it, it's because you don't have a Genesis. Yet. Steve even called it, definitely, without a doubt, positively the most incredible action game ever created for the Genesis. And I think they would all agree with his conclusion. Excellent, excellent, excellent. If there was any doubt left which platformer Electronic Gaming Monthly preferred, that question was answered when they named Sonic the Hedgehog the 1991 Game of the Year. It also walked away with awards for Genesis Game of the Year and Hottest Character in a Game. The popular comparison may be Mario 4 on the Super NES versus Sonic the Hedgehog on the Genesis, but when it comes right down to it, Sonic is the clear winner. If you disagree, then you better take it up with Steve, Ed, Martin, and the fake ninja Sushi X. Hey, thanks for watching me count down the best reviewed games of 1991. So, here's the question of the day. What do you think is the best game of 1991? And don't feel like you have to pick from the games in this video, because there are a lot of great games that missed this list. I personally love Final Fantasy II, Ninja Gaiden 3, Phantasy Star 3, and Super Ghouls and Ghosts. Let me know. We'll be back next week with our look at EGM's worst reviewed games of 1991. In the meantime, we have a bunch of reviews ready to go live, as well as a few previews I've been working on. And if you haven't watched our video where we look at what critics thought of the games in the Super NES Classic Edition, then I strongly recommend you do that right now. Also, click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.